In this video, we talk about the protests in France and pension reform, how this is affecting the European Union and the global economy. Let's dive into the world of politics and find out what is really going on. And no, this is not a piece about corruption, but rather about unpopular decisions at the worst possible time in history. The history of France is rich in protests and mass demonstrations. From the French Revolution to the Yellow Vests, popular unrest has often been the answer to social and economic problems. So what is it this time? In 2022, the sharp rise in inflation and very expensive energy in Europe hit the standard of living of ordinary people hard. So it was the economic problems that undermined social stability. And just at that moment, President Emmanuel Macron returned to his idea of raising the retirement age. This was the last straw for the French, so they took to the streets. People spouted everything that bothered them. So the slogans against raising the retirement age are turning into statements against Macron's entire policy and demands for his resignation. And there are also echoes of geopolitical problems in the protests. People are screaming for France to leave NATO because they want to start Third World War, and also about leaving the euro, which deprives the country of national sovereignty and takes away billions of contributions to the general budget. In general, these are classic oppositionist claims. Nonetheless, pension reform and labor law in France remain the key themes. The French authorities are raising the retirement age and changing the pension system in general. As a result, people are unhappy that they will have to work longer, but the government says there is no choice. Otherwise, the pension system simply won't have enough money. By the way, the controversy over pensions and labor laws in general is a long-standing problem in France. There were protests about it in 1995 and in 2019. That said, the country's current president, Emmanuel Macron, wants to be remembered as a reformer, and pension reform is his main brainchild, notes Politico. So the French have long been aware that Macron wants and will push for changes in this system by all means. Back in 2019, he was probing the ground. Even then, he tried to introduce bonuses and fines to encourage people to work until age 64, as if to prepare the public for an increase in the retirement age. At that time, too, the reaction was very negative. The country's economy was paralyzed for weeks. People did not work, went to demonstrations, and expressed discontent. These were the longest protests since 1968. In the end, the reform was postponed. All the more reason to blame the problems on a sudden pandemic of the coronavirus. Nevertheless, the authorities did not change their plans, even when they saw the dissatisfaction caused by the mere hint of a change in the pension system. Macron himself says that it is necessary to normalize the pension system and the French budget in general. One would think, what's wrong with that? After all, France has the fewest pensioners at risk of poverty compared to other European countries, except that this comes at a high cost. France spends 14.5% of GDP on pensions, twice as much as the United States, for example. So far, the French pension system is in surplus, but the Government Advisory Board predicts a deficit of 1.8 billion euros this year, and by 2025 it may grow 5 times, up to 10 billion euro. Even here, though, things are not clear-cut. The same advisory council said their data and forecasts do not say that the pension system is out of control, and that things may still be fine by 2030. But still, the authorities are worried that there won't be enough money. This is why they are trying to solve the problem as painlessly as possible, in their opinion. By the way, they rejected other options, which are also unlikely to please the people. Raise taxes, increase public debt, or reduce pension. And in general, the problems of France's pension system open a big wound in almost all developed countries. The demography is skewed toward the elderly. But in Europe, the low birth rate, coupled with the high quality of life, and hence its duration, leads to the fact that the elderly are becoming more numerous compared to the young. At the same time, France has very high rates of expected retirement years. Among men, 23.5 years. Among women, 27.1 years. This is the second result on the entire European continent. As a result, a small number of people of working age have to provide taxes and contributions for an increasing number of elderly people, and that's just plain hard. So the retirement age in the leading European countries is high, 65 to 67 years, and in general, developed countries are raising it. So France is well in line with the rest of the world. Macron and his government plan to raise the retirement age not so much, from 62 to 64 years. And everything is gradual. From September 2023, it will be raised for 3 months every year and so on, until 2030. In addition, the required length of service for a pension in full size will be increased. Now it is 41.5 years and it will be 43 years. But again, the increase will not come right away, but from 2027. Finally, some special pension regimes will also be canceled. They reduce the required length of service for retirement for certain professions, such as those in the transportation or energy industry. At the same time, the state will increase the minimum guaranteed pension for people with low income to 85% of the minimum wage. As you can see, the changes do not look so scary. So where did such strong protests come from? Protests in France are massive, with people of all ages and social groups joining in. This is largely due to the French culture, which calls for active expression of opinion and confrontation with the authorities. The French are not fed a baguette, just let them protest. And sometimes it works. The authorities do respond to discontent and can at least change their decisions, if not cancel them, so people continue to go on strike. One of the likely outcomes of this whole situation is that the Macron government will back down. Even if the pension reform is formally adopted, it may be rolled back. There was a similar situation in 2006, for example. Back then, the authorities were pushing a youth employment law. Student associations and unions took to the streets to oppose it. Despite the fact that the law was passed even in the assembly, the protests did not stop. And a few months later, the president and prime minister decided to postpone the law. So now the protests against the pension reform continue. The French want to repeat the past success, but it is unclear whether they will be willing to continue striking as long as the economy stands and fuel and energy prices rise, especially since Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne has stated that she will not make concessions. It is unclear whether the government will re-elect. Also, the opposition could call a referendum on a joint initiative. Then, any citizen who is against the reform will get to vote. But the referendum is easy to organize, the experts say. 5 million French people have to vote for it. And then it is also necessary to get votes for the abolition of reforms. So thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel and write your opinion in the comments.